Almost universally, it is not worth it to buy a knife block. When I first moved out on my own, I was gifted a beautiful knife block with 12 knives. Ostensibly, I could do anything I wanted with that set. But practically, I only found myself using 1 or 2 consistently, and those were low-quality knives that dulled quickly, and the other 10 or 11 were just gathering dust. That's because you only need a few high-quality knives to cook pretty much anything in your kitchen. And those pre-curated sets, well, they just don't cut it. You should save your money and focus on buying a few high-quality knives that will last you a lifetime. And today, I'm here to help you learn how to build your perfect knife set. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, Kaboodle. Kaboodle is a kitchen and home goods store located here in Portland, Oregon. They have an incredible variety of products available, but also have just about the nicest, most helpful employees I've ever met. They are so knowledgeable about their craft and are able to take time with you to figure out the right products that you need, not just make a sale. They provided all of the knives here today for us to go through on our exploration of building a knife set, and have also provided a lot of incredible materials for the cooking classes I host here in Portland. If you want to check out their vast variety of products, go to kitchenkaboodle.com. Before we go over any specific knives, first we need to go over some knife basics, starting with the anatomy of a knife. When it comes to knives, there are 2 primary portions, the blade and the handle. There is the tip of the knife and then the edge being what you primarily use to cut your food. The back side of the knife is called the spine and is where most of the weight in the knife is carried and the stability comes from. The blade and the handle are separated by the bolster. Some knives have a full bolster and others only have a partial bolster. The handle is the part of the knife that you will hold, and there are many different shapes available. Japanese style knives have a fully enclosed handle, while Western style knives have an exposed metal portion that is known as the tang. All knives fall into 2 categories based on their method of production. Stamped knives are the affordable and mass-produced option. They are generally more flimsy and have a shorter lifespan than our other type of knife, which are forged knives. You can usually tell the difference between a forged and a stamped knife by the presence or lack thereof of a bolster. Forged knives, as you might guess, are forged instead of stamped and are of higher quality, weight, and generally better working and longer lasting than the stamped options. Since I'm a big advocate of buying for life, we will only be covering forged knives in this video. There are many options for building your perfect knife kit, and as we go through these, note that your personal cooking style is the most important part of this. Knives that work wonderfully for me or my friends may not work perfectly for you. We'll be discussing our all-purpose knives, which are chef and Santoku knives, our finesse and fine detail knives, which are paring and utility knives, and our special use knives like bread knives and boning knives. Let's break it down. About 90% of the cooking you do in the kitchen can be done with an all-purpose knife. These all-purpose knives can be used for pretty much anything, from breaking down meat to slicing fruits and vegetables to cutting portions of fish. If there is any place to splurge on a good, high-quality, long-lasting knife, this is the place. There are pretty much 2 choices when it comes to your all-purpose knife, the chef knife or the Santoku. Chef knives are also known as cooking knives. They are the Western all-purpose knife. There are many types of chef knives available on the market, and they generally range from 6 to 14 inches long. Although the most common length of chef knife is 8 inches, like this Wusthof Classic that was provided to me by Kaboodle. There are a few important prominent features of a chef knife. They almost universally have a very sharp pointed tip for piercing and a long, slightly curved blade edge. Chef knives are most often used with what is called a rock and chop cooking method, where you put the tip of the knife in contact with the cutting board and then rock the knife to cut your food. This allows you to have high force and quick motion, allowing you to work through a lot of chopping at once. The heavy weight of chef knives also allow you to do some pretty intense style cutting, like breaking apart joints inside a chicken or cutting through very large pieces of meat or giant fruits or vegetables. They enable very high speed and power in cooking. The second main choice you have for your all-purpose knife is the Santoku. While historically the chef knife has been the go-to all-purpose tool in Western kitchens, the Santoku is becoming much more popular. Historically in Japanese cooking, there were 3 primary types of knives. The deba, which was used for fish, the gyotu, which was used for meat, and the nakiri, which was used for vegetables. After World War II, when there was increased Western presence in Japan, a new type of knife was developed, the Santoku. Santoku means 3 virtues in Japanese. That references its ability to slice, dice, and chop, but also references the fact that the Santoku can replace those other 3 traditional Japanese-style knives in one single tool. You'll immediately notice that Santoku knives look very different from a conventional chef knife. They are generally shorter, only 5 to 7 inches in length, and they have what is called a sheep's foot shape, meaning they have a curved back but a straight knife edge. While Santokus do have a sharp tip like a chef knife, they have a very different flat blade along the edge. And that is because you use a different cutting style when cutting with a Santoku. Instead of utilizing a rock and chop, you will use what is called a push and slice or vertical chop. This enables the Santoku to move much more agilely through foods, and it puts the knife blade in contact less with the cutting board, which means it will dull much more slowly than the chef knife. Most knife purveyors will make Santoku style blades, whether or not they are a traditional Japanese knife maker. Here I have the Wusthof Partner Santoku, provided to me by Kitchen Kaboodle. So, how do you choose the right all-purpose knife for you? Some of it comes down to physical motion and what you are used to doing when it comes to cooking. If you are very attached to the rock and chop style method, you should go for a chef knife, or find a Santoku that is advertised as a rocking Santoku. If you prefer the intentionality of the vertical chop or the push and chop method, then you should go with the Santoku. In general, I think that chef knives are heavy-duty all-purpose knives, while Santokus are an agile knife. Or if you're like me and enjoy cooking with your partner in the kitchen, you can go for both. The second essential knife inside your knife set is your finesse tool. If you are breaking down a large number of vegetables, you will of course reach for your all-purpose knife. But if you are cooking something smaller or breaking down a small, delicate fruit, you do not need a giant 8-inch knife. What you need is a small finesse knife. And for that, we have 2 options, the paring knife and the utility knife. Many people claim that the paring knife is the second most essential knife in the kitchen. Paring knives are small, very delicate knives, usually only 2.5 to 5 inches in length. They are straight blades with an incredibly sharp tip and edge. And they are primarily used for very delicate cutting tasks, things that you would be doing in your hand, like peeling an orange, coring an apple, or removing the stem from a strawberry. They can do everything that a peeler can do with even more versatility. Here I have the Wusthof Partner Paring Knife, provided to me by Kitchen Kaboodle. If you want to make beautiful, delicate garnishes, the paring knife is your go-to tool. The utility knife is only slightly different than the paring knife. It has a long straight blade as well, but is usually slightly larger, between 5 and 7 inches, and is considered the midpoint between a paring and small chef knife. Here I have the Shun 6-inch utility knife, provided to me by Kitchen Kaboodle. Utility blades also have a straight blade and are also lightweight, and they can be used for pretty much everything a paring knife can do, from peeling to coring to cutting beautiful, delicate garnishes for dishes. However, because they are slightly longer, you can also substitute a utility knife in for a chef knife when needed. I find utility knives to be a great go-to knife for most purposes. So, which is the right finesse tool for your kitchen? If you love intricate, tiny cuts, making garnishes for meal, or peeling a lot of citrus, a paring knife is a go-to choice. If you want more versatility and the ability to swap in for a chef knife, a utility knife is a great option for you. And if you cook a lot, you might find yourself getting both, because while they are similar in the ability to do delicate tasks, they are very different knives. Once you have chosen your all-purpose knife and your finesse knife, now you have to ask yourself if any special use knives are right for you. And honestly, I'm going to argue that both of these knives should be a part of your kitchen set. Today, we're going to discuss 2 very specific use knives, the serrated bread knife and the flexible boning knife. These are not substitutes for one another, but are important based on your personal cooking style. Our first special use knife is a serrated knife, specifically a bread knife. Bread knives feature a very long, straight blade that is incredibly firm with a dappled serrated edge, usually 10 or more inches. This is the 10-inch serrated Kangshan bread knife provided to me by Kaboodle. To understand the importance of this knife, we need to talk about the physics of serrated blades. Most knives have a long, straight edge that all at once comes into contact with food when you are slicing. That means the primary force is being directed down through the surface of the food into the food. That becomes a problem when you talk about foods that have a very delicate center but very firm edge. Think a nice loaf of bread or an avocado or tomato. Forcing that knife blade onto the tough edge will apply the pressure down, smushing the inside of your food and having a hard time cutting the outside. A serrated knife is like many different knife tips all in a row. What that means is that when you use a serrated knife, instead of forcing all of the pressure downward, you are cutting by applying the pressure in many different directions. That means that you can cut and slice a tough outer skin without applying force to the inside of your food. That means a serrated knife is phenomenal at cutting through a tough crust of bread without damaging the soft, fluffy interior, and slicing through the exterior of an avocado without smushing out the inside. Serrated bread knives are very important in certain cases and are not really replaceable by a conventional chef knife, but they can't be used for everything. They're not great at cutting things that have grains, like meat. They'll actually tear the edge of it instead of cutting smoothly like a chef knife. And I will note that because they are so useful in a limited number of cases, they tend to dull more slowly than other knives, which means their maintenance is pretty easy. So I'd argue if you eat bread or tomatoes or avocado or any delicate fruit, you should be using a serrated knife to cut it. The second special use knife that I will argue should be a part of your kitchen kit is the boning knife. Boning knives look and handle very differently than all the other knives we've covered. They have very little metal, a very sharp edge, a finger guard here to protect you while cutting, and most importantly, they are flexible. To understand why this is so important, we need to talk a little bit about geometry. Knives are wonderful at cutting straight lines, but the problem is most things in nature aren't straight lines. That means that when you start cutting large objects with a straight chef knife, you're gonna have trouble approximating the curve. When you take a curve and try to break it down into straight lines, one of two things will happen. You will either end up lopping off a bunch of the material or having to use many very tiny cuts to approximate that curve. That means that chef knives are not good at cutting curved objects. On the other hand, a boning knife is a flexible knife. That means that as you cut along a curve, you can follow that without having to use 1,000 different small cuts, which means quicker cuts and less food waste. Boning knives get their name from their use in breaking down large cuts of meat and cutting along curved bones, but that's not the only use for them. Yes, they are useful when cutting down meat, but you can also use a boning knife to break down fish and break down large fruits and vegetables. As you can see, when I break down a pineapple, I lose a lot of the fruit when I use a chef knife to peel off the pokey edge. But when I use a boning knife, I can follow the curve and save a lot more of the fruit. So if you do any breaking down of large cuts of meat or large fruit and vegetables, you should strongly consider getting a boning knife for your kitchen, like this Kangshan boning knife provided to me by Kaboodle. Before we wrap our conversation on building your ultimate knife set, we do need to talk about care and maintenance of knives. Because knives are a tool. Without the proper maintenance, even the nicest knife will eventually dull and become a dangerous blade to use. Let's talk about storage and cleaning first. You need to make sure when storing knives, you are not dulling the edge or accidentally hurting yourself. My preferred method of knife storage is a magnetic knife rack, but you can also use blocks for storage or storage cases that some knives are sold with. Here's the hard fact. Even if your knife says it's dishwasher safe, it's not. You should always hand wash your knives and not run them through the dishwasher. As we'll discuss in a second, the most important part of knife maintenance is maintaining a sharp edge. And even if your blade does not rust or damage inside the dishwasher, it will become dulled by running through a dishwasher cycle. I always recommend when you are done using a knife to keep it out of the sink. You don't want to accidentally cut yourself when doing dishes. And then quickly hand wash and dry immediately. You can also damage the tip of your knife by washing it and leaving it upside down to dry, letting all the water drip to that important point. But the most important part of knife maintenance is honing and sharpening. On a microscopic level, knives are thin beveled points, and they get their sharpness from that point. As you use knives over time, that point will dull, and on a microscopic level, those particles will get pushed around and lost, eventually resulting in a dull, not pointed knife blade. At that point, you should get your knives sharpened, whether professionally or by buying a sharpener at home. When you properly sharpen a knife, you're actually removing some of the metal from the blade to reestablish that point. Therefore, you shouldn't sharpen your knives too often, as it will shorten the lifespan of your knife, but you should do it occasionally as the material wears down. Honing is different from sharpening and still very important. Let's go back to the microscopic level. When you use a knife, yes, you will wear off particles, but you will also accidentally push those particles out of alignment. And when the tip of your knife blade starts curving over on a microscopic level, it's no longer going to be sharp. And this is where honing comes in. When you use a honing steel or honing ceramic, you are gently pushing those molecules back into a vertical alignment, recreating a sharp tip. Fundamentally, honing is just realigning the edge of your knife blade, whereas sharpening is removing some metal to reestablish that edge. Whenever you find your nice knives at home not seeming as sharp and having trouble slicing through a lemon, for example, go ahead and get out your honing steel and re-hone. You may notice that it quickly improves the quality of your cut. And when you reach the point that your honing steel is no longer cutting it, then you can sharpen. If your knives are reaching the point where they need sharpening, I would suggest looking at your local specialty kitchen store. Kaboodle, for example, has a service where you can drop off your knives and they get sharpened and you pick them up a week later. Even the best knives will need to be sharpened once in a while. When you build a nice kitchen knife set, you can have it for the rest of your life. As long as you properly clean, store, and sharpen your knives, these have incredibly long lifespans. And you'll find that cooking is a breeze when you're cutting with an actually sharp knife. Thank you again to Kaboodle for sponsoring this video. Let me know in the comments what kitchen tools we should talk about next. And until next time, I'm Kara, and I can cook. Is it gonna work this time?